right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Legislative Wrap-Up Friday Forum. Today, as we kind of educate you, fill you in, and answer any questions that you might have had on the 2021 legislative session for Empower Missouri. We had a very fascinating session this year. I think we were all a little bit nervous going into it, didn't feel great through most of it, and we ended up with several good policy wins, progressive, especially criminal justice reforms, and we're overall quite happy actually with how this session went for the issues that we care about. So we're glad that you're here and ready to hear from us today. So this is our agenda. I am currently welcoming you right now to our forum. My name is Sarah Owsley. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director here for Empower Missouri. I also lead our housing work, so you'll hear from me soon. On the call, we also have Mallory Rush, our Executive Director, who's going to fill us in on some of our criminal justice wins this session. Christine Woody, our Food Security Policy Manager and St. Louis organizer. She's going to fill us in on food security. And Jeremy Lefevre, he's going to just tell us a little bit about what it was like to be in the Capitol this session and share his perspective on what is possibly coming. Then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. If something pops up while we're speaking, please go ahead and put it in the chat. If a different staff person can answer it in the chat quickly, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll answer those at the end when we have some Q&A time. And right now, I'm going to send you off just for a few minutes in some breakout rooms to get to know each other and chat and say hello to other people on the call here in just a moment. Empower Missouri works to secure basic human needs and equal justice for every person in our state. And we do that predominantly through coalition building and advocacy, legislative advocacy especially, which is what we're going to talk about today. So we're really glad that you're with us. So I'm going to send you out into just a little bit of networking here. You just give me 1 second to set up the breakout rooms, maybe, if it likes me today. Here we go. I'm just going to send you there for about 5 minutes. It's going to assign you out automatically, and we will see you back in just a few minutes. As soon as it lets me go. There we go. Hi there. Looks like we've got a couple of folks kind of coming in a little bit late, which is fine. I've already sent everybody out to participate in just some networking, chatting, getting to know each other time. So I'm going to just randomly assign you into a room.
They sent me back to the.
All right, very good. We're all back now. I appreciate all of you. Hopefully that was a good use of your time and you enjoyed that. We're going to go on and get into our programming now. I'm going to turn it over to Christine Woody. She's going to talk about our food security from this legislative session. Christine?
All right, thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I know it's a beautiful day here in St. Louis, so hopefully it's the case all across Missouri. So this year ended up being a very good year for our Food Security Coalition and the issues that we are working on. And many thanks to all the advocates to make that the reality of what happened. So I know at the beginning of session, we had a pretty big concern that there were 2 bills filed in the Senate and the House. So pretty much identical bills filed that were aimed to increase work tracking and work requirements for accessing the SNAP program, which is the food stamps program. And we, at the beginning of session, were pretty confident that that sort of a bill was going to be a priority for the majority party. And we kind of thought that there might be a lot of action on that issue this session. But in the end, I think because of a lot of the education and testimony and advocacy that Empower Missouri and all of our coalition partners did regarding this issue, it fell down the list of top priorities for that majority party, kind of just slowly just kept getting further and further down on the top list of priorities. So we were able to significantly stall and stop that bill from moving, and it did not significantly move through the process, which was great. We had significant support on that specific issue, specifically from Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. They wrote a very extensive policy report on work requirements for SNAP. I'm going to put a link to that report in the chat when I'm done here that you can link to, and it will give you lots of great data and information about why that is such a problem. So because of their report and thus the one-pager kind of more bullet pointed approach to that issue that we were able to pull together, we were able to do some significant outreach on that, specifically to senators. And we were able to kind of arm the senators who were also against that issue with some great information and with some great support, where they felt that they had enough information and enough support from folks like our advocates that they were willing and able to support a filibuster if that bill was ever going to make it to the Senate floor. And it never did. It never came up to the Senate floor for even the opportunity to have a filibuster, which was great. That was a huge success. So we are super grateful to all of our coalition partners who called legislators, submitted testimony on that. It really paid off. And we are really grateful for all of your work. I mean, we do believe that this issue is going to be back. We will be ready for 2022 when it is most likely filed again. We have that great report. We have some great one-pagers that we will continue to use over, I'm hoping, the next 6 months to do some more education on this issue. So I really hope that you can kind of look on our coalition page and get involved on some of the advocacy and education efforts we're going to do on that issue here over the next 6 months as we get ready for 2022. On the positive note, you can see the list of things that we were able to get passed. Because of the strong advocacy efforts from quite a few of our coalition partners, quite a few of these policy priorities that we had on the list were able to get passed. So right near the end of session, 5 of the policies that we were had on our list were amended onto House Bill 432. And that bill was passed at the final stage of the session, and it's now waiting for the governor's signature. And you can see the 5 things that are listed on there that it did. I will just talk a few seconds about each of them with a little bit more detail. So in the statute, it created the WIC Farmers Market Program. There is grant money available from the federal government to implement a program like that. So it put in Missouri law to the departments to begin to implement that program, which is allowing WIC participants to use specific vouchers to buy fruit and vegetables from farmers markets and roadside stands. Similarly, it's extended the sunset date for the Missouri Seniors Farmers Market Program, and that Farmers Market Program is specifically for senior citizens who are on the SNAP program or the food stamp program. That program is already in place as like a pilot project in the state, but the sunset date for that program had passed. And so this just extended that date for that specific program by, I think, an additional 6 years. So that program is also going to continue. It also stated that the Department of Social Services will submit a plan to the federal USDA to implement a program called the Farm to Food Bank program, which will then contract with a food bank here in the state of Missouri to run that project, which just connects farmers and the food that they're gleaning to food banks to then get it to those folks who could use that fresh produce. Then the next one is regarding the CACFP program. That is the Child and Adult Food Program, Care Food Program. That is a program that provides meals for childcare and like adult care facilities. Previously, in the state of Missouri, there were really strict licensing standards for child care facilities to be able to access this program. This eased those standards just a little bit to actually reflect what is in federal law, where these child care programs only have to meet certain health and safety standards. They don't actually have to go through the whole process of being a licensed child care facility. So pretty much the point of that would be it's just going to allow more programs to be able to feed more children in the state of Missouri, which is a good thing. And then finally, the last provision that was added is going to create a Missouri Food Security Task Force. The Department of Agriculture is going to be kind of the one running it and providing the technical assistance for this task force. There's going to be members from the General Assembly, from a lot of different departments, from dietitians across the state, some food banks, food pantries, and some advocacy organizations who are experts in food security. And they're going to come together in this task force, and they're going to be looking at and drafting a report that specifically is going to address food access issues, so food deserts in urban and rural parts of the state, and pull together a policy report, a report that's going to go to the governor's office, and hopefully some legislation will come forth of that to kind of address food access in the state of Missouri. So that's a really exciting development. And we will kind of follow that as that moves along in the process of being formed. All of these provisions are still waiting to actually be signed by the governor. And of course, it takes time to actually get them implemented throughout the state. So we will continue to be following these as they're signed into law and are being implemented through the different departments. And we'll keep you updated as that process kind of goes along. But overall, I would have to say that 2021 was very successful for our Food Security Task Force. And through lots of different meetings that we did have, I think there's lots of opportunity for legislator education in the coming months and into 2022. There's some legislators who have never heard the word food desert. There's some legislators who do not think hunger exists in our state. So I think we have some opportunity this upcoming year to do some real targeted education looking to 2022. But overall, very successful year.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christine. Well, you know, we've done this forever. You'd think I'd have a better grip on how Zoom works. All right, so an update about our affordable housing policy priorities. We were very concerned about a bill that was designed to shorten the eviction process. We already have one of the shortest eviction processes across the country. And from the court date, essentially, to the date that you must be out is 10 days right now. That's very quick already. There was a bill that would have moved that to just 5 days, which was very, very fast, very difficult for people to actually comply with. I could not move in 5 days, and I have all sorts of resources available to me. And so this would have been a very dangerous bill. We were able to stop this bill from moving forward pretty early on. And we were really concerned because we know that eviction and housing was a big conversation in the wake of the global pandemic. So we're very happy about that. We also put a lot of energy and effort towards finalizing the EITC. While certainly Empower Missouri cannot take full ownership of that program, there was lots of work done on that for a very long time. It is absolutely something that we spent a lot of energy on because we know that cash resources are a stabling factor for families who are experiencing poverty. That, as it relates to housing, that's often moving expenses. It's first and last month's rent. It's the ability to catch up on past due utility or rent bills, arrears, etc. So we identified that early on, and we worked hard to make sure that that was included in a larger tax package. We're not happy with everything in that package by any means, but we are very happy and know that that program will help return some of the wages that are earned by families with low wages back into their pockets and provide an ability for them to stay stably housed, hopefully. We also passed some other smaller changes, some changes made to abatement programs. Tax abatement is an issue that Empower Missouri cares a lot about. These are ways that we divert tax dollars from the programs that they were designed to fund and instead to redistribute those back to developers to incentivize certain types of economic development. Sometimes that's a good idea. Unfortunately, they're often misused and often inequitable. And so we worked to make some changes to how those programs work. We are in no way fully satisfied with what that ended up looking like, and we'll continue to work on that as well. There were some changes made to the MHDC board and how the commission will function. Again, small changes in what really needs a pretty significant investment to function better and provide more options for more affordable housing across our state, especially outside of our more urban areas. And there were some housing provisions that were included or housing impacts in the criminal justice reform provisions that Mallory is going to go over here quickly. I know there are many people on this call today who will be very happy to hear that anytime we can help people who have been justice involved attain and sustain affordable housing, that's a very good thing, both for the safety of our communities and for that individual family. So we are celebrating and happy about those changes as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mallory while my dogs start barking.
Perfect timing. Now, if only I can keep my dog quiet while I talk. Hey, everyone, happy Friday. So good to see all of you. I think that criminal justice was the area where we had some of our biggest wins this session. And I also want to take this opportunity to introduce our brand new fourth day on the job criminal justice policy manager. So Chris Morrison is with us today. And welcome so much to Chris. We're so excited to have him. For those of you who are part of our Smart Sentencing Coalition, you'll get to meet Chris and talk with him more in depth at next Friday's coalition meeting. But he is going to be leading all of our criminal justice work moving forward, while Christine gets to move and have put more of her energy into our food security work. So just a quick update there for everyone before I get into all of our wins in the criminal justice space. So this session, we had a number of different focus areas. One of those was around juvenile protections, the headline one being ensuring the implementation of Raise the Age. So some of you worked over the last 5 years or so to ensure that the Raise the Age legislation was passed in Missouri, essentially ensuring that 17-year-olds are appropriately handled by the justice system as children and not as adults. That legislation was supposed to go into effect on January 1st of this year. And in most places in the state, it did not go into effect. And the reason for that was that prosecutors basically made the argument that it costs more money to handle a juvenile case than an adult case, and that the funding was not provided as promised. And so we worked sort of a two-front battle with the legislature this session to make sure that the funding was added to the budget, which it was, and also to pass a bill with some language clarifications around this bill that helped to clarify the implementation. So one of those clarifications is ensuring that if someone is charged as a juvenile when they are 17, that they can receive services through the juvenile system up to their 19th birthday. So all of the time that they are 18, instead of having them be cut off on their 18th birthday, which was previously the practice. So we're really thrilled about that. We know that folks that are handled by the juvenile system are much, much more likely to be able to successfully reintegrate into society without a lot of the barriers that exist for folks that are coming out of the adult system. Had a lot of really great partners, including Representative Evans, who's a previous juvenile judge who worked with us on that work. So we're very, very thrilled to see that. Also worked with Representative Ingrid Burnett on her legislation around juvenile right to counsel, and making sure that it's basically much harder for juveniles to forfeit their right to counsel than it is for adults, knowing that juveniles are much more easily coerced and might be able to be convinced to forfeit their right to counsel. This bill basically makes it much, much harder for them to be able to do that. And the other thing, one of the other things that we saw that we're pleased about is making sure that if a juvenile is certified to stand trial as an adult for whatever reason, so there are some higher level crimes where you can charge a juvenile as an adult still in Missouri, that while all of those appeals are happening, while they're trying to figure all of that out, that the person is still being held in juvenile custody. So making sure that we are not putting children into adult facilities unless it is absolutely necessary. So we were glad to see that as well. Empower, you're going to start hear us talking more and more around work dealing with expungement. So we are one of the founding partners in a new statewide coalition to work to drastically expand expungement across the state and ultimately pass what is known as clean slate legislation, which would be the automatic expungement of a number of different types of criminal records, starting with arrest records and moving up to some other records. This year, we were able to take a couple of key steps forward in improving the expungement process, both by reducing the waiting period that exists for people who want to have a record expunged, and also repealing the prohibition that you cannot have an arrest record expunged if you have a prior conviction. So that's really key to be able to make sure that when people are arrested and ultimately are innocent, no charges are brought, that they are able to quickly have that arrest record removed from their record. And then there were a number of law enforcement accountability provisions that passed this session. And this work was led by Senator Brian Williams. So finally have passed a law in Missouri that prohibits sexual conduct between a police officer or a corrections officer with someone who is in their custody, basically making the argument that if you are in the custody of law enforcement, you cannot consent to a sexual act. So that now is a Class E felony in Missouri for police who commit that crime. We have limited but not banned the use of chokeholds. We would have liked to see that language go farther, but it's a step in the right direction. We've established a use of force transparency act, so making sure that anytime police do use significant force that causes injury or death, that information is reported to the federal government. We have created provisions with the federal wrap back program to basically make sure that complaints against officers are well documented, so that if there is a police officer that is fired for misconduct, that information follows them to any future law enforcement job that they may apply for. And then there is a new provision created by law this year that says that law enforcement officers will have to undergo regular mental health check-ins. Right now, the law says once every 3 to 5 years. We'd like to see that be more frequent, but it's a good step in the right direction to make sure that officers have good mental health provisions. Next slide, please. There you go. One of the other bills that we worked on a lot this session and in previous sessions and are so excited to see passed was expanding work opportunities for those with prior felony convictions. So this is a bill that Representative Cherie Tolson-Reich has been working on for several years. Under Missouri law, up until this point, people who have a previous felony conviction couldn't work in any establishment that sells alcohol or lottery tickets. So people were blocked out of many good entry-level jobs at gas stations, convenience stores, grocery stores, restaurants. Those provisions will be repealed when this bill is signed into law, which is going to open many new work opportunities for folks around the state. So that's very exciting. Something that we didn't work on, but that we are very excited about and is worth mentioning is the passing of the Pdmp, or Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. This has been a priority of one of our close partners, Senator Holly Rader, for many years. This makes Missouri the 50th and final state in the country to have a Pdmp in place. And we believe that's actually going to be really key to overall efforts to lower incarceration numbers in the state of Missouri. In theory, what a Pdmp does is lower opioid abuse across the state, which would then lower related arrests and incarcerations that are tied to opioid abuse. And then finally, one of the things that we fought really hard against, along with a number of organizations, including the ACLU and the NAACP, was fighting really hard to make sure that there were not new penalties for protesters who block traffic. Legislators fought very hard to add a felony conviction for those who block highways or just regular streets. And those provisions, while the underlying bill did pass, those provisions were removed in the last couple of days of the session. So we're obviously thrilled about that, both because we think that there are First Amendment rights at hand and people have the right to protest and attract attention for their issues, but also because we just don't believe that criminalizing behavior that we don't like is the answer to any problem. And then I'd also like to talk a little bit about our HIV Justice work, which this session largely had to do with modernizing our HIV criminalization laws. So huge shout out to the members of the HIV Justice Coalition who had worked very hard on this. This was the 4th or 5th year in a row that this legislation was filed. There's been a long process leading up to this year's victories in terms of educating the Missouri legislature about the current science around HIV and why Missouri's incredibly outdated and medically inaccurate laws needed to be revised.
Now, could you give us bill numbers on some of these, please?
Sure. Well, yes. So most of these were passed in a couple of omnibus bills at the end of the session. So almost everything that I've talked about thus far was either in Senate Bill 53 or Senate Bill 26.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this modernization language ended up as part of Senate Bill 53. A few key things that this does. So one, it stops HIV from being singled out, which the HIV community feels very strongly adds to the stigma that exists for folks who are living with HIV. So the language has now been changed in all the laws related to HIV to say a serious non-airborne illness that requires lifelong treatment. So really working to start to end some of the stigma that exists for HIV. It also opens up the possibility for folks with HIV to be able to donate blood, tissues, organs when deemed medically appropriate by a doctor, which should absolutely be happening and be decisions that are made by healthcare providers and not by Missouri state legislators. So we're glad to see that. We fixed the definition of exposure. So the previous definition of exposure was very detailed and had a number of things listed that actually now we know today are not things that transmit HIV. So took those things out of the law and also created provisions to say that someone who is using preventative measures to attempt to make sure that they're not spreading HIV should be able to use that as part of a defense if they are tried with these laws. And then I think the biggest changes were around, so the current law relating to HIV criminalization is that yeah, so I'm seeing in the chat. So this is the language from HB 755 and Senate Bill 65. So that exact language ended up amended on to SB 53. So that is these bills. So they were heard, they were passed out of both of those committees. And in sort of the last couple of weeks of session, it just became clear that there just wasn't time to get to those as standalone bills. And so they added that language into SB 53, which is how it was ultimately passed. So raising the mens rea meant that what we did, so under the current law, since SB 53 has not yet been signed, what it says is that all that they needed to do to prosecute someone who spread HIV was show that they had done it recklessly, which means there doesn't have to be knowledge, there doesn't have to be intent. It just happened that someone contracted HIV from another person. So we raised the level of mens rea to knowingly, to mean that to charge someone under the new provision, you would have to show knowledge of that level of exposure that you were subjecting another person to. And at the same time, we also lowered the penalties associated with transmitting HIV. So under the current law, the transmission of HIV to another person can be charged as a Class A felony. That's the same as murder in Missouri, which can result in 15 to 30 years in prison. And if you expose someone to HIV and they did not contract it, it could still be charged as a Class B felony, which comes with a penalty of 5 to 15 years in prison. So under the new law, the penalties will be lowered to a Class C felony and a Class D felony. The coalition maintains that we would like to see no felony charges tied to this kind of crime, but that will be something that we go back and deal with at another point, rather than, it's sort of a one step at a time sort of situation. This is what we were able to get the legislature to do this year. Eventually we'll work to make sure that these are misdemeanors and not felonies. And then finally, really big news in the HIV justice community is that Missouri did something really, really, really progressive this session. So we became the third state in the entire country to make post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP as it's known, available over the counter. So if you think that you have been exposed to HIV, there is a drug, PEP, available that, if taken within 72 hours of that potential exposure, reduces your chance of contracting HIV by over 80%. So this is, it's an incredible advancement in science. It's been available for a few years, but up until this point, in almost everywhere still, you need a doctor's prescription to be able to access it. But if you can imagine, especially given the state of healthcare in rural communities, can be extremely difficult to be able to get a doctor's appointment, get a prescription, get it filled in that window. And so it is really exciting that we are able to say that Missouri is now the third state that people can just walk into a pharmacy and request a 30-day supply of that medicine, and then be able to follow up with their physician at a later date. So the first state that passed it, responding to the chat, is California. And the second that passed it, I believe, is Colorado, but it could be Oregon. I don't remember. Both Colorado and Oregon had filed the legislation. Only one of them passed it. I think Colorado, but I could be incorrect. One of those two. And Missouri is the third. That's it for me. Over to Jeremy.
Super. Thank you, Mallory, Christine, Sarah. Sarah has something she wants to say, I believe. No, she doesn't. Okay.
Sorry, that finger was to the toddler.
Oh.
I understand why that was confusing.
I get it. I get it. So, I'll be quick here, but it was an interesting session in terms of not a lot of legislation passed. The previous year, only around 50 bills passed, and everybody kind of chalked that up to COVID and kind of the weird year. And of course, COVID impacted the beginning of the legislative session. There were kind of some hiccups and some slow starts, but they worked pretty thoroughly. But at the end of the day, only 68 or so bills passed, and 18 of those were appropriations bills. And so again, only about 50 substantive pieces of legislation actually ended up passing. Now, as you've heard, a whole bunch of pieces of legislation were folded into Senate Bill 153, Senate Bill 53, Senate Bill 26. Some House bills got omnibus attention, but a lot of times you'll see conflict between the two chambers or between a chamber and the governor, but largely they kind of get worked out at the end. This year, we really didn't see the workout come down at the end. There were some sort of loose negotiations that allowed some of these sort of more progressive things to get through. But Medicaid expansion and the FRA renewal are two really large, certainly the FRA renewal is a complete failure on behalf of the legislature. And because of the conflict between the House and the Senate, and then the House and the governor, and then members of the Senate, they're sort of viewed as three caucuses loosely in the Senate. You've got the Democrats, and then within the Republican Party, there's the conservative caucus, and it's usually around 6 or 7 members. Even that caucus kind of grows and shrinks sometimes depending on the issue. And then you've got sort of the rank and file Senate GOP. And because of those interpersonal infights, the FRA was, so the FRA is a tax on Missouri hospitals. And the way Missouri uses that is they then take that funding and pay the state's portion of our Medicaid program. And so then we draw down a whole bunch of federal money. It's basically our way of funding Medicaid without funding Medicaid through state GR. We tax hospitals to do it, and the hospitals do that voluntarily. Well, they go along with the FRA. It used to be this tax extension was 5 years. It was 2013, I think they changed it to 2 years, and then they changed it to 1 year. And largely it was used as a leverage against hospitals so that the hospitals didn't get too far out front advocating on behalf of Medicaid expansion and other things. The leverage never worked. The hospitals never stopped advocating for Medicaid expansion. And now Senator Wieland and Senator Onder have pledged to include some anti-choice language. It would restrict a person's ability to use birth control if they're on Medicaid, and so they've are almost insisting that it gets there. I think with a little bit of work from the governor, they could have probably gotten there with Wieland, certainly, because he's almost termed out and is looking for an appointment probably. But over the last couple of weeks, the Biden administration announced or issued in their budget recommendations that they weren't going to include the Hyde Amendment. And that has caused a whole bunch of people in the state of Missouri to be very, very concerned. And so there's more grassroots pressure on not just Onder and Wieland, but on all of the senators to hold strong on that. What it would mean if they don't end up passing it is that the state would have to come up with $1 billion in state GR to cover that cost. And that would mean significant restrictions across the budget. The last I heard is that the governor is finally engaging with members of leadership. Last week, he issued a statement and said, I'm not going to call a special session until the legislature figures out how to fix this. And that wasn't well received by anybody, because I think most everybody is saying, look, boss, you're at the top and we need to hear from you, and we need you to lead us through this, because the Senate is almost an unworkable mess at this point. So I think he's engaging a little bit more this week, and hopefully we'll continue to do that. When that has to be approved, we used to think that it didn't have to be approved until maybe September, August, but then the Biden administration last week again came out with some guidance that Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services is wanting Medicaid plans in by July. Another wrinkle is that the lieutenant governor is going to be out of the state towards the end of this month, and he presides over the Senate and is a great negotiator and peacemaker in the Senate. And so when something big like this comes up, having Mike Kehoe around is a good thing. Everybody loves a Mike Kehoe deal. And I never miss an opportunity to say that. So there's some wrinkles there. Whether they can get it done in June or not, I don't know, but there's some pressure on them. That's the most likely, we have this on here, most likely cause of a special session. There's a, you've probably read the newspaper about every other day, 1 or 2 lawmakers calls for a brand new special session. This is one where if it doesn't get done, genuinely catastrophic things would happen for the Missouri's healthcare system. So we're watching it closely and engaged deeply on that with, our group is, and we're partnering with all the hospital groups and all the other groups to know as much as we possibly can. But largely that's a fight between the governor and Onder and Wieland at this point. On the criminal justice front, we, a lot of great things were done. I want to, give recognition to Senator Williams and Senator Lutemeyer to an extent, who came along and certainly his name was on the bill to pass. So thank you to Senator Lutemeyer for agreeing to have good legislation on your bad bill. But then, there's been some efforts in the city of St. Louis and Kansas City to redirect police department funding, and that has gotten the attention of largely St. Louis County and St. Charles County lawmakers who are up in arms about that. I can't imagine that would go for a special session. The governor is going to hesitate to call one on FRA that he really needs because people can't get along, and there's no way that they can hash out an issue like police reform or funding reform without other horses to trade, certainly in the Senate. And so I think that's probably unlikely. That felt more political than truly a policy thing, but I've been wrong before and will be wrong again. So we're watching it for a special session, but I'm not convinced. On the ballot initiative petition process and voting rights, there was a lot of thought that things of that nature could pass this year, certainly leading up so that they could be in place for the next election cycle. Again, it was some of these infighting things that didn't allow that legislation to get forward. It was largely personality things more than the policy held it up. It's still a large priority for the supermajority party, and so we will continue to expect that to be a priority in the next legislative session and continue to watch it. I know our friends at the ACLU and others are bird dogging that very closely. Ron Berry, who is on my team, focuses on election issues, or who works with my team, focuses on those issues and keeps us updated when matters of great import pop up and opportunities for advocacy arise. And we try to make sure we pass that on to people to be impactful and effective when it's necessary. So that's the under the dome. I think there's a lot of uncertainty. There always is, but I feel more uncertain this June than I feel like I've ever felt in a June after a session, even after a pretty decent legislative session. But the problems in the Senate don't seem to be going away, and next year being an election year will certainly present opportunities for challenges. Anyway, that's what I got to say. Happy to answer questions for folks who haven't.
Jeremy, do you think that restricting voting rights and sabotaging an initiative process are likely to be part of a special session?
I wouldn't think so, no.
Good.
It's always possible, sure. Dan, but there are enough corporate interests that don't care for that for that to get a special session type investment. And there's
Can you
just not
explain
enough
that?
grassroots interest in it to
Oh.
rise to that level. But
Which corporations are on our side?
well, I think from a PR standpoint.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
We've had a very active chat box during our presentations today, so we may not have any questions, and that is also fine.
If there's no questions, I will take a time to recognize a handful of lawmakers, just because I know, those folks work their tails off, and I think a handful did a lot of really good things that empower folks ought to be aware of. I think Senator Greg Razor, Senator Holly Rader, Representative Phil Cristofanelli in particular on the HIV justice issues were champions there. We talked about Senator Brian Williams, Senator Lutemeyer, I think Senator Washington, Senator May as well, engaged in a lot of the criminal justice discussions. Judge Evans, who's the chair of Judiciary, worked on Raise the Age and is going to be a great champion and just a tremendous statesman and tremendous lawmaker to work with. There are a lot of good ones down there, but there are a handful of ones that are challenging, and it's really nice to walk into Judge Evans' office. He's the chair of a committee, and he's just really thoughtful, and he cares about our issues, and so it was really great to work with him. I also want to recognize Representative Cherie Tolson-Reich, who did a number of good things and did some heavy lifting for us as well. On the tax front, Senator Arthur and Senator Rizzo were tireless champions and fighters for the earned income tax credit. That's something that way back in the MASW days, even I think before there was a Missouri Budget Project, y'all were working on EITC. And so for that to finally come together, it took lawmakers being adamant about it and making it a very top priority in every meeting. And so Senator Arthur and Senator Rizzo did a lot of that. Senator Eggleston, certainly negotiating with him wasn't without its challenges, but that wouldn't have happened if he didn't see the light. And there were a number of folks, Representative Faulkner helped us with that as well, and Representative Kidd. So that was a lot of names, but there were a lot of people. There were a handful of folks that were disappointed and frustrating this year, but hey, if it was easy, they wouldn't need all of us, right? But there were a lot of people who was really pleasant to work with. And so I hope as folks get time this year in the interim, having served in the legislature, thanks come few and far between. And so as you have times to reach out to people on the majority and minority party side to say thank you for your hard work, that goes a long way towards developing those relationships for successful advocacy later on. And off my soapbox.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you to our Empower Missouri staff. Again, we're all really readily available. If you've got questions that pop up later or things that you heard today that you'd like to chat through later, please reach out to any of us. We will post this online. It will be available to you there at empowermissouri.org, and you can make sure to subscribe to all of our emails there as well, and follow us on social media. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.